And then welcome, Erin from Illinois. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I am Erin Vobornik. I am from Illinois, but please don't hold that against me. Um, I actually just vacationed this summer in lovely Michigan, up in Hale, Michigan, um, and had an absolutely fantastic time. So I am the Students as Leaders Coordinator for COABE. And apart from that, I have many other roles that I play in adult ed. So one of which is as a professional developer, and the other one is also as an instructor in an adult ESL classroom that's housed in a community college. Though I also have the experience of working with our adult learners in community-based organizations as well. And one of my passions is empowering learners to be able to use their voice to make the changes that they want to make. And through empowering them, I found a love of advocacy myself. And to share just a little bit about how I came to that point, because I am actually a very shy person. And I had always assumed that advocacy and leadership were for people who were extroverted. They were out there ready to mingle, ready to talk to people. And I prefer to be the observer. I like to watch dynamics. Um, I like to research. I like to not speak until I'm sure that I have something that I want to say. And so I thought, leadership and advocacy are just not for me. And I realized that's not the case. It takes everybody to make a change. And when I realized that for myself and I started talking about that and sharing my experiences within the adult education classroom, I had so many of my own students say, well, I'm not a learner, I'm not a leader. I'm not a leader. I don't even have a job right now. I'm at home with my two young kids. Well, I'm not sure how many of you have young kids or have been in charge of overseeing young children for any more than 5 minutes, but that takes leadership skills, right? There are transferable skills in leadership and in advocacy to just about every part of our lives. And so, as I talk today about empowering our adult learners as education advocates, even though the focus is really on the context of helping them advocate for their education, in particular adult education, I also want to just make it clear that these skills transcend education, right? And so let's dive in. Like I said, I'm a teacher, so I need to have a schedule of what we're covering. So we're going to start by first talking about what advocacy is. We're going to unpack and look at some examples of 3 different essential advocacy skills. And then we're going to talk about building a culture of advocacy, because I have found that that is one of the most important parts. And it's one of the parts that takes a while to do. But once you start to see that culture of advocacy, it just is exhilarating. And I'll give examples when we get there, but I'll give examples from within the classroom if you're a teacher, at the program and state level if you also have other responsibilities besides being a teacher. And then talk about what's next, giving you resources and contact information so you can call me anytime. I might not answer late at night or very early in the morning. So I'm going to type into the chat so that you have it. So you have the option here. So this is going to be an interactive thing. And if you're someone who just likes to type stuff in the chat, please feel free to do that. But if you're somebody who wants to participate anonymously, or if you just think, I want to try out this Slido, feel free to do that as well. And I've set it up so that it will be anonymous. You're able to share and typing into the chat the numbers where you're gonna go, the numbers you're gonna type in, because I want to hear from you. What is advocacy? Again, feel free to type it in the chat or use the Slido.
I just happened to notice in the chat, you put the number 2610431, but the one on the thing says 2640431.
Thank you. That is a good catch because I definitely typed it in incorrectly. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see. All right, speaking up is one of ours so far that people have shared, asking for support to support a cause. All right. All right. Telling your story. So I'll let these continue if you want. I know we only have 10 folks in here, so we're not going to fill up this screen most likely. So help, support, asking for support. Absolutely. And I love that this is where the focus has gone because sometimes there is this misnomer with advocacy where it's seen as a political, taking a side politically, or that it has to be speaking with legislators. And really advocacy exactly is, I love that, educating others about your circumstance. So it's public support or recommendation of a particular cause or policy. That's the definition that you would find in a dictionary. But again, as we're talking about our learners, advocacy is just basically that act of trying to persuade somebody. And advocacy has a little bit of a different connotation than persuasion, where I might try to persuade my husband that I'm a nerd, so that I need like a new set of books. That's not advocacy so much, right? Advocacy is really focused on something a little bit bigger. And I think it is important to note that while advocacy is not necessarily political, so many elements of our adult learners' lives and needs are politicized. And so it can sometimes to people feel as if they are taking a political stance by saying that certain needs need to be met or certain changes need to be made. And so I do want to address that because it is oftentimes very difficult to separate advocacy and policy completely. All right. So again, I'd like you to give an example of a time that you've advocated for something or someone. And again, if you don't want this example attached to your name, please use the Slido where it will be anonymous. You can also use the chat, and if you want it to be anonymous-ish, you can send that chat directly to me and I'll read it out, but without your name or information attached. So an example of a time when you've advocated for something or for someone. And it doesn't need to be related specifically to your current role. Advocating for a student to be allowed to participate in a program. Wonderful. I'll give an example while others are thinking or others are typing for my own personal life. So my grandparents graduated, they're in their 80s, late-ish 80s, and they graduated high school, but really it was because nobody failed high school. You either just stepped away from high school or you were given the diploma, but they both graduated and had and still have under a third grade reading level. And they do not have the internet. They do not know how to use the computer. And so now that so many things are shifting, where you make appointments for doctors on the computer, they walked into Walgreens. They were looking to get, I believe, a flu shot. And Walgreens said, I'm sorry, you need to go online and make an appointment. And they said, we don't have a computer. Can you just help us make the appointment here? And they said, no. They said, you need to go find a computer, maybe go to a library, but we can't help you. So they left. They called me because I live down the street and I have a computer that I'm unfortunately in front of most of the day. And so I helped them make an appointment. But then I also said, this just is not, this isn't right? So sent an email to try to advocate and say, I think that perhaps this policy should change because you are leaving out an entire group of people who don't have access or the ability to use that. All right, an example of a new library for a fitness program to be added and count as a health credit. Nice. Okay, so I want to share what some of my students said when I asked them. And I'm just picking some of their examples here that highlight different forms of advocacy, whether it's advocating within one's own family, right? Her husband wouldn't let her daughter get her piercing. Again, I asked for these anonymously, so I didn't get any further information about that. And then work in school in some very, very serious contexts, right? Discrimination at work. Mostly in school. Sometimes I feel that only smart students can reach their goals. Right? So it really started to touch on these situations in which our learners need to be able to have these skills, and what better place for them to practice these skills, to be empowered with these skills than within our programs. So we're going to look at some essential advocacy skills, but I want you to think back to the example of that time that you advocated for something and think about what skills you had to use. Apart from just communication skills, what did you need to be able to do to even attempt to advocate for yourself or for someone else? What would have been helpful? And I'm not going to make you type it in the chat because I'm making you interact a whole bunch. And there were probably a lot of different things that you needed to be able to do just for that one act of advocacy. As we're talking about large and sustained advocacy and really aiming for growing those big advocacy skills, I'm going to focus in on 3 for today. And when I do share these slides, I will also share a graphic that kind of lays out all of the different skills that are required for self-advocacy, and you can see there are many, but these are 3 that we're going to focus on here: storytelling, public speaking, and community engagement. And we're going to look at some examples, and fingers crossed this video works the way that I wanted it to. So I am going to show you just a 3-minute clip from this video. And as you're watching, this is going to highlight storytelling. And if you were at the COABE conference, whether virtually or in person, and you saw this session, this keynote was absolutely incredible. So we'll watch 3 minutes here, but this full 15 minutes is available on the COABE YouTube channel for anyone to watch, and I highly recommend that you do. So I'll mute myself for the next 3 minutes, 35 seconds. And I do want to note that there was a kind of a audio issue toward the beginning, so the sound is very low, and that is just kind of the way it is. I do have subtitles on there, and it does get better.
Good morning. Wow. My name is Jonathan Swinsberg, and I'm a living, breathing example of the importance of adult education. I must admit I have a lot of anxiety, and standing up in front of this many people, it's a really big job. But having the confidence to overcome that anxiety is one of the main benefits that adult education has provided for me. Another time throughout my life I've experienced anxiety is putting in applications or looking for a job. When you fill out a job application, after you give them your basic information like your name and phone number, before they even get to your work history, the first thing they want to know is what is your education history? And I would always pause in terror and look at that little box that said last grade completed, because I'd have to put in that little box that my last grade completed was the 8th grade. This lack of confidence and anxiety would carry over to the interview process and cause me to miss out on a lot of opportunities. Approximately 40 million American adults do not have a diploma or GED. And I believe lack of this credential has caused me a lot of problems throughout my life. One such example was I was working for a company for about 10 years when my boss left to take a position somewhere else. They brought a new person in who had no experience in the industry. And as I was training this person to be my boss, I thought, why did they give them the job and not me? And the answer was quite simple. They had an education and I didn't. And this got me thinking about going back to school. I'd even contacted a GED Learning Center and talked to somebody who was really encouraging and told me how they would be flexible to my schedule and kind of tore away all the excuses I had. But I still never followed up with it. And as the days went by, the desire to go back to school just kind of faded into the background of going to work every day and providing for my family. Then one day in 2014, that daily grind came to a screeching halt when I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. I had surgery to remove a tumor, followed by aggressive chemotherapy and radiation treatments. The treatments that were there to kill the cancer about killed me in the process, and I ended up in the hospital for over a month for failure to thrive. At my worst point in the hospital, I had taken my last chemo treatment and had about 10 radiation treatments left, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. I thought about my wife and my 4 sons and all the reasons I had to live, and just none of it just seemed enough. The treatments were just so bad. I just wanted to give up. And I prayed for a second chance, and I vowed if I got that second chance, I would never take anything for granted again. My prayers were answered as my cancer went into remission. and I knew that I had to make the most out of my second chance. So the first thing I did was went and signed up for
Part cut a little early. So as soon he then went, got his GED, and I won't tell you all of the other amazing things that happened because you should go watch the rest of the video yourself. And so I just want to um, give a real example of somebody sharing a story rather than relaying secondhand. And so let's look. One thing that Jonathan did is that he included data on the number of people who might have a similar story to him, wove it with his story. And that is effective advocacy. If we're looking at how these skills are transferable within our classroom to the workforce, right? We need data to back things up. And we also need to include a story with data, otherwise it doesn't really have much meaning. We need audience awareness. So Jonathan was standing up. Thank you so much for the link to the rest of the video. Jonathan was standing in front of a room of educators and adult education professionals. So he knew that he didn't need to give a lot of background information about what we do because we know that. Just by dropping in the chat, when you say you work in adult education, how often do people actually really understand what happens in our field? How often do people know that you're working with adults who are working on the skills that we're teaching them? Do people think you are teaching college level classes? Maybe you're teaching grad school. So sometimes people do not understand, and so having that audience awareness is yeah, it is a very wide umbrella. Even from state to state, right? So having that audience awareness is a key skill. Here's the note that I want to especially put on here is that the storytelling really needs to be student-led. And this is something I'm always very careful of in my classroom, because it's so easy to get excited when somebody shares their story and think, oh, this is incredible. And but what if you highlight this part and change that part? And it's important for us to realize and to just understand that it is that person's choice what they do share. So I was on a team that actually worked with Jonathan, helping him to prepare for that because he was nervous to be in front of hundreds of people, as most of us would be. So he wrote that entirely himself. And what our team did was just essentially kind of help it to fit the time frame. Help say, maybe you want to have this part first, right? Maybe you want that statistic over here, making sure that it had a flow, but not ever pushing for him to share more than what he was willing to. So again, it's always the student's choice, understanding that they're partners in advocacy, they're not tools for advocacy. And then a key part of storytelling is that the story is focused, but it still has heart. And again, watch the rest of that video, but watch it with a set of tissues nearby. Watch it when you're ready to, because it is a story that really pulls at your heart. right? And there were a lot of people in the audience there at Kobe who were crying. So again, a story that has heart, it doesn't have to be a story that's going to make people cry, but when somebody feels confident about sharing their story, that heart naturally comes out. All right. So I covered some examples of storytelling, but again, either if you don't want to use Slido, you can type in the chat, but what other components of storytelling did you see in that clip that perhaps I did not mention? Great. Honesty. Yes. And that honesty really, that's something that if we're in the classroom with our learners, we have built a relationship of trust. And so that is something that we are able to see because people are willing to be vulnerable with us. It is something that takes practice and it takes building confidence for someone to feel empowered to go out of the classroom and to be honest and to be vulnerable with a group of people when they're not really sure how they're going to react. And to go, again, going back to what I had mentioned a little bit earlier, is that especially for some of our learners, parts of their stories might be politicized, right? They might not be taking any sort of stance. They are sharing their story, but sometimes sharing it can perhaps have consequences. His transparency, yeah, a great balance between just enough detail without being too much. Fantastic. All right. So then how do we move from that skill to public speaking? And I believe this one is just a quick 1 minute just to give an example of what public speaking could look like. And this is another actual adult learner. She is Anna Chavarin from Arizona. And just a quick little snippet here.
Good afternoon. This is David Saphir. We're on the Education, the Rest of the Story program, and I'm here today with Anna Chavarin. Nice to have you here, Anna.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, Anna is here to talk a little bit about her education and her travels through education and how she got to where she is right now. And it's a pretty interesting story. So I'll begin with, you were born
In Mexico.
and you came to this country later.
Yes, 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Now, you came here, about what level was your schooling when you came to this country?
I just finished my middle school. I didn't have my high school.
Okay, and I know right now you're taking courses at Pima Community College.
Yes.
So how did you get from your middle school education to where you are now? Give us a little bit of a story about it.
Well, I knew about the adult education program by Pima Community College. I enrolled and I started taking classes to get my GED. It took me about 2 years to get my GED.
Mm-hmm. And after you got your GED, some people will stop with that and figure that will get them the job they want. That wasn't enough for you?
No.
Why?
No, I started, if I may say, I'm a survivor of a violent crime. So when I was recovering, I met other women and I realized that this situation happens more often. So I felt lucky that I was bilingual and I was getting the help that I needed, but other women weren't.
And Anna goes on to have a 10-minute interview, but I wanted to just highlight here some of the incredible things that Anna does. And I will say this is many years ago that Anna actually recorded this, and Anna is is now doing a lot of public speaking. And so the verbal and nonverbal communication. So kind of looking at in public speaking, right, we're judged by not just what we say, how we say it, our body language. And I say that knowing that I'm in a swirly chair and I'm having a hard time sitting still because I had my 3 cups of coffee this morning. But also understanding that that nonverbal communication, if we're working with English learners or people who grew up or have spent a lot of time in their kind of formative years in another country, then that nonverbal communication is really different from country to country. And so some of these things do need to be covered explicitly. And then, of course, the dynamic modalities of public speaking. So what I mean by that is there are so many different ways that public speaking, many different ways that it can look, right? It's oral storytelling, which can be in person, it can be by video. It can be a written story, which is published, perhaps published in the MACAE newsletter, or it could be something that is posted on social media. So this public speaking, of course, includes a lot of other small skills, but helping students to prepare those skills and have an understanding of what public speaking is incredibly important for preparing for advocacy. Because without that piece, that awareness, we are really doing them a disservice. And part of the reason why is because once that is out there, right, once something is on the internet, it doesn't go away. So that story is out there to be shared. If they are sharing something about something in their past, sensitive information, something that maybe they're sharing for the first time and their family doesn't even know this yet, these are things that people need to understand before sharing their story. So for Anna, again, in the chat, however you like, what other evidence of effective public speaking did you see in that clip? Of course, taking into account it was clearly like a public broadcasting interview. And I'll share one that I saw. So in the beginning, I would say, based on her body language, that she seemed maybe a little bit nervous. And that moment when she smiled and kind of laughed was relatable, right? So that authenticity. Yes, and I see in the chat, relatable, absolutely. Her story is relatable, slow, clear speech, eye contact, and especially in that situation, that's a challenging one because your eye contact is with the person interviewing you and not necessarily with the camera. But absolutely, these key components of public speaking, and again, eye contact might be something that you actually have to have an explicit conversation with somebody about, who might be from a country where you don't make eye contact, or there are certain groups of people that you can make eye contact with and others that you can't. So important things to have discussions about. And if you're thinking, Erin, you're making a long list of like things that I need to cover with my students, you're adding a lot of things to my checklist. Again, that we're getting to the answer for you. We're getting to the tools. And then community, and this one is broader. So I'm not sure how it's been in Michigan, but here in Illinois, there is a lot of renewed focus on IELCE, and civics competencies. And this is a really key component of advocacy, and a really wonderful way to talk about community engagement is through advocacy. And for those who are already engaged in the community, to be able to explain to them either how they're already advocating or the ways in which they could. So effective community engagement requires a solid understanding of civic structures and civic engagement. So what does community engagement look like? It's that understanding of expected meeting dynamics and procedures. And again, this might not even be something that many people in our individual programs, teachers know how to do. But when you have a meeting with a stakeholder, what do you do? What is the protocol? How do you prepare for that? So some of the questions that this allows our learners to really dig into, some of the key questions that if you are advocating, you would need to ask yourself is, who can actually affect the change that is needed here? Who has the power to make this change? And then how do I connect with that person? So I have engaged in a lot of advocacy, and sometimes that person's email address is readily available, or their office phone number. And sometimes I have to fill out a contact form and then get one of those, like, thank you for submitting this. We'll get back to you, maybe. And so it's important to understand how that happens as well. And I do want to share, so for this one, I didn't have a quality video. This is a screenshot from a video, but unfortunately, it was a video I was taking on my phone, and the sound quality and the video quality were quite poor. I am not a videographer, but I'll explain what is happening here in this clip. This particular student is speaking at a college transitions event. So she completed all levels of her English as a second language training. She went on to get her associate's degree and is now getting her bachelor's degree at a university in Chicago, where she is, I wish I could tell you exactly what she's doing, but it is so far beyond my knowledge of biology and chemistry. But she is working with researchers to study cancer and cancer cells. And she is giving a speech to current English as a second language learners and stakeholders within the community college, sharing how when she came to the country from Colombia, she did not speak a word of English. How she was able to engage with others within the community, how taking English classes completely changed her life, and how her goal is to be able to do the work that she's doing in science, but then to also be able to volunteer time to give back to that community. So that kind of cyclic structure there. So she She was one of my students who I worked with in a class where I had threads of advocacy and leadership going through there, and we practiced things like public speaking. And she was one who just absolutely latched onto it and loved it. And so that is what is happening here in this picture, is that we were then able to call on her and say, we have some funding for a speaker for our students. Would you like to be that person? Right? The students don't want to hear from a teacher. The students want to hear from somebody who also, you know, had barriers and struggles and was able to succeed. And then finally, community engagement also includes networking. And if we're going back to kind of trying to bring in some workforce skills, that's a key one right there. And then finally, a call to action. And that, I think, is one of the most important parts of advocacy, whether a student is advocating for themselves, whether they're advocating for education, is being able to craft an effective call for action. The what next? So I've talked about how these skills are essential, how these can transcend just content knowledge, and how it affects our personal lives, work, academic lives, the community. But it's also important that if we're asking students to engage in advocacy, to see themselves as advocates, that there's also a culture of advocacy in place within the program or within the classroom. So within the classroom, what does that look like? It looks like integrating some key topics into the curriculum if they're not there already. So leadership skills. And if you're wondering, well, how do I even teach leadership skills? Most of our learners, we have leadership skills. It's about pointing those things out. It's about helping to inspire confidence in learners to see those leadership skills, to be able to self-assess and label those. And if you're interested in how to integrate that, I have a lot more classroom resources than I can drop into a chat right now, that were all free, to be able to kind of bring that within the classroom. And then, of course, talking about civics, because if we're going to talk about advocacy, we really need to make sure that our students understand the particular environment in which they would be advocating. And then what does this look like in the program or at the state level, whatever level you're in? In a program, it requires commitment and support, which means it might require time or focus. Time or focus might look like an administrator sending out an email congratulating a class for engaging in some sort of advocacy activity. And again, advocacy does not have to be political. Right? So if you're thinking, oh, I don't want a class like campaigning for somebody, I'll give an example of an advocacy project that we did in one of my classes, which sprouted up quite naturally about halfway through the course, because I had been integrating these leadership skills, because we had been talking about advocacy. I took my students on a tour of our community college, and we walked through some of the other buildings, and my students were just admiring the artwork on all of the walls. And we walked to the library. They said, teacher, there's even more artwork here in the library. I said, I know, isn't it beautiful? This one's my favorite. And one student turned to me and she said, we have no art in our adult education building. Why don't we have art? And I said, I don't know, Maria, that's a really good question. She said, we're going to start a petition. right? And so my, advocate heart thought, oh, this is fantastic. But I, that was a Thursday, come back the next week, and it had slipped my mind. But it had not slipped theirs. It had spread like wildfire, and they decided, you know what, we want to advocate to bring artwork to our building. And so we were able to kind of I was able to take what they wanted to do and be able to integrate those advocacy skills into it, right? Like, who has the power to be able to do that? What do they want to hear? What can we tell them? How can we sell them on this? My students created a video, they created a petition, they sent all of this on. They went classroom to classroom. And this was a group of learners that in the beginning of the semester, they did not want to stand up in front of the class in our own classroom to do any sort of speaking. But all of a sudden, they were really excited and asked if they could go into all of the other classrooms in our building to present, to try to get people to sign this petition, right? Because they had a mission now. They were determined to make this change. And I am happy to report that that change was made. We got artwork covering almost every single wall in our building. And when they came back that next semester and they saw the artwork up there, because things weren't super quick, they said, teacher, we did it. We got the artwork. And I said, absolutely, we did. And it started to bubble up a little bit of a culture of advocacy, because then that next semester, another class asked to come into different classrooms, and they wanted healthier options for food within our building, because all we had were vending machines and really unhealthy food in the vending machines. And most of our adult learners work all day, come to class at night. They need dinner. They don't need Gardettos. And so now every semester, there are at least a couple classes that are now focused on these new initiatives, these new changes that they want to make. And they're doing the research, they're asking for surveys, they're asking for people's feedback, and then they're actually advocating for these changes. And because of it, we have artwork on the walls. We now have healthy food trucks that come sit outside our building. We have all of these new processes just within our program because we've started to build a culture in which advocating to the administration, to the program, to the other teachers is something that is not just accepted, but it's celebrated. So that's what I mean by building that culture of advocacy, because it's bubbled up, and we now have students who are excited to be able to make these changes. And if we think about retention, because that's something we have to worry about in our programs, it helps people come back because they've made a change. They have a sense of ownership. And I put financial support up there because it's always nice, not always necessary. So the changes that we made, the students were able to advocate for things that were already available, or just changes in policy that just required some time and some focus. But that is another way to be able to support advocacy. So I am interested now at this point of what kind of tools would be helpful for you to be able to empower adult learners as education advocates. Again, in the chat, using the Slido. And it's okay to say, I don't even know where to start, so I don't know what tools I need. Oops. Sorry, I forgot if this was one of those slides where I needed to click to show answers. It's not. I'll give you one more second in case you're using the slide. There we go. Ways to identify what students would even be interested in becoming advocates. And that's a fantastic question too. And I'm going to get to that one of these next slides. Okay. I'm going to click on the next one for the sake of time, but if you are, oh, there we go. Have an ambassador meeting. A motivation or reason for my students. Perfect. Okay. So what's next? Here is one way to bring and build those skills, which is something that is already created, already available through COABE for free. I have to make sure I put the free on there because not everything in the world is free. But there are three options here, and I've tried to make it as straightforward as I can here. Option one is an in-person training. Essentially, I help you plan it, but you lead it. Something that can be done in 1 or 2 sessions. So it's usually a full day or 2 half days to be able to cover the amount of content and prepare students to be ambassadors. And this, they actually get a certificate that says that they are a student ambassador. And we can co-brand that with your program, with MACAE's logo, whatever your partnership is. Option number 2 is you say, Erin, I am a part-time teacher working at 3 different places. I am exhausted. And as much as I want to do this, I don't have capacity for it right now. And I would say, I hear you and I am here to support you if I can. So option 2 is online on Zoom. Because I have 2 little ones at home, so I can't always travel, even if it is to lovely Michigan. So this option, I plan it, I lead it. I can set it up at anywhere between 1 to 4 separate sessions. I could do more than 4, but that's a bit too much, Erin, for you and your students. A total time of like 3 or 4 hours, right? So it can be one meeting, like 1 hour a month for a semester. Again, we can work on it. It really depends on what your goal is. And then option 3 is online asynchronous. We already have the student ambassador training built out. Those 3 components I talked about are the components that are built out in depth for students already. So it's available. Students can sign up for it on their own. Or if you're a teacher and you say, I want to kind of integrate that, I want to, maybe they do some of that in class on a computer. If they finish some of their work early, maybe that's part of their homework. I have the capacity to set up class sections with the teacher as the kind of moderator, so you can see who's in there working and what they're doing. It's really geared toward people who are at a low intermediate kind of NRS like 3-4 level or up. And it really depends on how carefully people are reading things, but they can complete it in anywhere from like 2 hours to 4 hours to get that entire training done. So option 3 is a really nice option for classroom teachers who want to integrate it into their curriculum. I've done it as well, so I have some resources for you to be able to do that. And again, it's important for me to note that I like to work closely with anyone who is interested in building advocacy skills into classes or programs or states, whether it is this ambassador training or something completely different. Because I do understand it's impossible to address all needs, everybody in every state in just one training. So if you have specific needs, if there are specific things that you want to do, talk to me about the needs you have, your challenges, and we'll work together to find a solution that works for you and for your learners. So I've been embedding advocacy now into my classes for 5 years, from the intermediate to advanced ESL levels. So what is that? NRS 3 to 6, as well as within career bridge classes as well. So I've integrated it into a manufacturing bridge and a business finance bridge. I'm passionate about this, and I am here, absolutely here to help you. I'm going to skip that one for the sake of all right. All right, so the Q&A. If you have any questions, pastor's meeting. Okay, I think these are some things from the other ones. Ooh, all right. So I think this is in regards to an instance advocating. So we've got a district pit bull. I like that description. Okay. And since that kind of got convoluted, what we'll do is, if you have a question, type it in the chat or unmute yourself. This is my information. All right. So this is my email address. I will type that into the chat as well, because I really do want to work with anybody who says, you know what, I want to do something, but I don't know what, I don't know how, but I want to make this happen. And this is my phone number. Text is usually easiest. If you want to call, you know, texting to make sure that I'm available is good. But if you have an idea in the middle of the night, it's not going to make a noise and wake me up. So feel free to to call or to text if you need to. So really, you don't have to be a big name like Patrick Brown, who's not here today, to reach out. Again, I believe in integrating this at really basically every level. And if there are resources that do not exist, but you need them, Coabe and I will make them for you. So just reach out if you need any help. And thank you so much for joining today. It's always exciting to see people who see advocacy and student empowerment and want to engage in that. So thank you very much.
Any final comments or questions? I will put the sketch link again in the chat one last time. And I will echo Jen's statement. Thank you very much, Erin. That was quite interesting. We have an advocacy chair at MACAE. His name is Ted Kroll. I don't know if he's talked or met with you, but we'll give him your information so he can.
Wonderful.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Make sure you fill out the sketch form by the 13th. And everybody have a good day.